And therein, I would say, is actually something that I think we are learning in real time from Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because they're not waiting to be asked for permission. They are giving that opinion and they are setting those lines, drawing those lines. And it's really interesting, the point about leading large teams. So I've been very, very fortunate in my career to have a chance to build and scale very large teams twice now for very hyper growth organizations. And there's a truth that obviously you want the very, very best people to come on board, and you do want them to be able to scale as the organization is scaling. But you also want to make sure that you're actually invested in them as people, not just as their professional output.
Welcome to Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I'm your host, Dr. Cynthia. With over 30 years in the corporate world as a single mom, cancer survivor, and often the only woman in the C-suite, I understand the balancing act high-achieving women face. Now an executive coach and international speaker, my mission is to embolden every woman in the C-suite or on the rise to claim her agency and challenge the norms holding her back. Tailored for ambitious professional women, this show features candid conversations with powerful business leaders sharing their real stories of success and failure. If you're ready to look up and step up, you're in the right place. Join us and invest in your future today. Well, hello, and thank you for coming to another episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I'm your host and your coach, Dr. Cynthia. If you're a woman who has ever struggled with perhaps integrating life and work and family and all that comes with it, this episode is for you. And if you're a woman who perhaps has not yet had family or has no interest in having children, but you struggle with other elements in life as it relates to women's equity, this episode is unique in that as we unpack equity this month around all of our episodes, we're going to take a unique focus around equity in women's health, which is a huge topic and a huge area that we absolutely have to focus on. And today's guest knows about both of those things very, very well. Amy Kunrojpanya is a mother of three, an experienced global business leader, a board advisor, and a passionate advocate and activist. She's the founding member of Elevate, a board advisor at the pioneering biowearable technology startup M, an executive producer of the global documentary Sisterhood, a recipient of the Icons of Change 2025 award, a prolific mentor of women and girls, which we love, across Asia, an angel investor, advisor, and strategist focused on female founders, technology, and women's health. Also, she brings 25 years of international experience with some iconic brands, including Coca-Cola, Google, Uber, and most recently, Netflix. So she has a wealth of knowledge and experience. She's also an ambassador for gender equity and specifically a focus on gender equity and health. Please welcome to the show, Amy. So happy to have you.
Dr. Cynthia, it's a delight to be here. I can't wait for the conversation.
Please call me Cynthia. And let's clarify. So are you, you're coming to us from Singapore today? Is that where you
I'm
are or
actually
where?
dialing in from Bangkok in Thailand.
Okay, you're in Bangkok today. All right. Well, we love it when we have folks from around the world who bring an international global perspective. One of the things we realized in our research doing for Now Near Next is that the experiences of women around the world, we studied women in 4 countries and 5 race ethnicities, is we have a real shared experience in so many ways when it comes to our professional lives. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you've lived in 75 countries and speak 7 languages, so I would think you have a very clear global global point of view.
It
And
definitely provides context, yes.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now we're gonna do this all in English, by the way, because that is my secure primary language. But I always like to start with our guests. You know, we come to this work with an origin story. All of us have something that is really what triggered this passion in us, and take us through that because you have such an interesting lived experience.
Thank you. So, as you might be able to hear from my voice, I'm an Australian, but I have lived and worked now overseas for most of my professional life, for almost 30 years. I actually was born in a tiny country town in rural Australia. And, I grew up with a sense that I was in a very isolated community and wanted to experience the world. I think that that very much was something that prompted me to want to be connected with people, to establish relationships, and also to see that communications and language, and in particular, the choices that we make around the words that connect us with each other would potentially divide us. It's so
Mm.
central to how I have evolved as a human being, as a woman, as a mother, and as an executive in the workplace. I went from Australia at a very young age overseas as part of my university program. I did my degree across 4 different countries, starting in Australia, then moving to Japan, and then China, and mainland China, and then finishing in Bangkok in Thailand. And from there, really established a labour of love with this part of the world. I have deep roots in the community, including a wonderful Thai Chinese husband and 3 gorgeous little children. But the origin for me around wanting to be a change maker, wanting to represent women, wanting to equip people to think about the world differently, I think also came from the fact that growing up, I didn't see in the corporate workforce that I joined people like me, people that came from very humble backgrounds, people that didn't have Ivy League degrees, people that were from rural communities. And I also didn't see women, and very rarely did I see mothers. Now, that doesn't mean that they weren't necessarily in the building or in different roles, but what I observed and experienced was very much that parenthood was invisible in traditional corporate settings, that it was
Mhm.
something to be embarrassed or ashamed of, that it got in the way of how people perceived us as professionals. And so, in a lot of ways, I would say that coming to this place where I can own being both a working mother as well as a working professional, it's about accepting that 2 things can be true. I can absolutely love my children, and I can love the experience and the gifts that they are in my life. And I can also want to be, a professional that does the very best work of my life and has the greatest impact I can have in whatever hours I have available to dedicate to that.
Yes, so true. And it's something you said reminded me. I was approached by a woman a couple of years ago, but recent. I mean, in terms of recent history, and she was pregnant. And she was vying for a VP level role in a particular organization, and she was worried. Now we're talking 2023, right? Recent times. She was
Yeah.
concerned about telling her leader that she was
Mhm.
pregnant for fear that it would impede her ability to be promoted to vice president. And I remember being both saddened, of course, but
Yeah.
shocked almost. I mean, it was so surprising to me that in this day and age that is still very much something that many, many women carry is this we sort of have to feel the need in some cases to keep that separate.
Yeah, and I think part of it is also that if you haven't observed motherhood embraced in an executive level, if you haven't seen it role modeled, you also don't believe that it has a place in this part of your life. I know one of the things for me, and I say this, obviously I now have a different perspective on it because of my own lived experience, but what I observed in my 20s and 30s was very much that in organizations that had the right policies and the right statements, in the respective, posters on the wall, everything suggested that people were family friendly, that there was a path to progression, that life could be full and bountiful. And yet what I observed was people who, when they became pregnant and or when they returned to the workforce, often weren't met with the type of support that they needed to be successful. Um,
Mhm.
and so I really believed that if I had children early in my career, before I had reached a certain point, whether that was a title or a particular proof point of success from a project perspective, that would be the end of my career trajectory. And the irony of my own experience, and very short, and of course you're welcome to ask more if you want to, but I had been married for 25 years. 20 years of that marriage, we had infertility issues. We were able to finally get a diagnosis and get some treatment. I have stage 4 invasive endometriosis, which is what led to that very significant delay.
Right.
And we can talk more about, both the joy and the hardship of that. But I
Yes.
then had 3 children in 4 years. And it was, an amazing experience, a very taxing experience. They are the joys of my life, but they have also meant I had to make different choices. And I say this because I really thought I wasn't going to give myself permission to have this experience because it took so much from me. And I remember having a female colleague who also had children who was a few, years older than me say to me, there's never a right time. There's never
Mm,
there's never really a lull. We like to tell ourselves, particularly as women who like to plan, that there's going to be a season when we can catch our breath and we can do something, whether it is children or some other project we're putting on hold. And the truth is that the right time is whenever you decide. But also, how you decide to go about this path, it really is only your decision to be made. And I remember realizing, I had an amazing experience with my last corporate role. I was hired 9 months pregnant.
mm.
And I was hired not only nine
That's
months pregnant,
amazing.
which to me blew my mind. And when I told this to other women, all of them couldn't believe that I would be taken seriously, that I would have been given this opportunity. And I started the role on maternity leave, which again, never in my wildest dreams did I think that would be possible. So I think so much of this isn't just about organizations creating an environment that is allowing women to make choices, whether it's early in their career, mid-career, or later in their career, for a variety of different reasons. But they actually have a way to make sure that that is not then subsequently a penalty that women then have to navigate
Mm,
on top of what can also be physically a very demanding, even sometimes, very debilitating experience.
yeah. Gosh, there's so many things that prompts in my mind. Um, Where to start? My sister said at 25, I got married young, and my sister, so we had been married for 2 years at that point, and she said to me at that point, she's 4.5 years younger, "There's never gonna be a good time, and I'm ready for a niece or nephew." And so, thus I have a 32-year-old daughter. Um, so there you have it. But yeah, there never is a good time. But you said something really profound that I wanna put a big highlight on, and that is it's harder to envision it if it's not role modeled.
Yeah.
That took me that's profound because what it took me back to is that woman comment to me, and then immediately I started thinking about, well, who were the people that she was able to look to in that organization that would have given her a role model to say, well, that person is at this level and has small children, et cetera.
Mm.
And there weren't very many, if any, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So so that is to your point about organizations and for the woman listening that is in leadership and has the ability to influence culture, et cetera, we can't minimize the importance of doubling down on the fact that representation matters
Yeah.
and having cultures that make it welcoming
Right.
and okay and celebrated, right? Not just
Mhm.
okay, but celebrated for
Yeah.
women to have and start families, etc.
Yeah.
Is an important point.
May I
Yeah,
give you just one really simple, tangible example?
please, absolutely.
If you are a woman in leadership and you have the ability to influence policy, think about flipping the idea of maternity leave cover from a planning perspective to maternity return. And I say this because when you
Mm,
say to somebody, I'm going to put effort and time into making sure while you're away, nothing falls through the cracks. What you are saying is you are replaceable. And the truth is that we all are to some
right,
degree. But if you say to
right.
somebody, I am working on your return plan of how we make sure that when you re enter the workplace as a mother, as a father, in whatever capacity you're coming back in, even for example, as someone who's dealing with chronic illness or serious health challenges and they re enter the workplace,
Yes,
how do we set up a support system so that it's not necessarily from day one you hit the ground and you are all things, but how do we
yes.
make sure that over time we continue our investment in you so that you see we show up for you and you subsequently decide, I'm in it and I will subsequently show up for the company. It's a
Mm,
totally different flip, but it makes such a difference to the individual who's in the thick of it.
because words matter. Words matter, and that in and of itself can be so culture changing. I remember when I did have my daughter, I was on maternity leave. It was only like week 3 or 4, and there was a leadership change in the department. And so I lived about an hour away from the corporate office, and I drove the hour. My daughter's about 3 weeks old. Drove the hour to meet with the new executive vice president of human resources at the time. Have this wonderful meeting because by golly, I needed her to know I was coming back.
Yes.
I don't believe she had children if memory serves. And so she was in her 50s, did not have children, and so I had this very big concern that, I was gonna get completely forgotten, and so by gosh, I was there, and I'll never forget, Amy, driving back, that hour drive after all that time because I was nursing. I was engorged, and I mean, I was in so much pain, leaking everywhere. I mean, for the woman listening, right, TMI, but we're gonna
Oh,
get into
thank
some
you.
details here. But I mean, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's what I put myself through because I was so fearful
Mhm.
that I would be forgotten during the 6 weeks that I took off for
Yeah.
maternity leave. Yeah.
I
So,
mean,
um,
I can echo this confession that even though I was absolutely given permission to be fully offline and
yeah,
present for my family and myself, I didn't feel at that time, I didn't give myself that permission. I thought
that's
that
right.
if I wasn't checking in, if I wasn't reading up, if I wasn't dialing into calls or video, that somehow I would be seen as less than and not as committed.
Yes.
I would be perceived in a certain way. And I look at that now and I think to myself, who on earth would be saying that other than that
Yeah,
unhelpful self-critic in your head saying, "They"? Who is the perpetual "they" that has all these strong opinions against us, right?
that's
But
right.
somehow that led me to do things that I look at now and really regret, and I think to myself, if you get the privilege of that time, my goodness, take it with both hands. Yeah.
That's right. You talk about sacrifice. We make sacrifices, right? And you talk about um, sort of this notion of there really is not work life balance per se.
Yeah.
Say more.
So I have been working, for more than 25 years. And at the beginning of my career, I honestly believed that the path to success was about being the person who could outwork everybody else, both in terms of the quality of the work that I did, but also the volume of it, that I would do it so well and in such large, kind of supply that it couldn't be ignored. It would be too good and too much of it. And that resulted in, sacrifices that I made that had meaningful health implications because everything about the job came first.
Mm,
And what I've learned over time is that the concept of work-life balance, it's a false equivalency. It's not real. And I say that
that's
because in our minds, I think, and particularly as women, but also as mothers, we look at balance like this idea that somehow we can do something and then we will have made the scales exactly equal. We will have arrived, it will be ours, we hold our breath and we enjoy it. Except that every single day you are doing things that tip the scales one way or the other. You're making conscious trade-offs. So what I believe in is not balance, but boundaries. And,
right.
this was something that was said to me when I was preparing to come back from my first maternity leave after my first child. And this was the height of COVID. This was working remotely. This was a new industry, a new role, lots of different potential challenges, but an opportunity as well. And so I asked, what do I need to think about? And the person that gave me this advice said to me, what's got you so far in your career has been over delivering. But now, what if you just gave 100%? What if you even gave 90%? Because, as somebody who's driven, who's ambitious, who's, I would describe myself as a recovering perfectionist, if
Right?
you're in that category, thank you for the self awareness, but I still hold the time.
Exactly.
You if you're in that place, you want to do more because it's back to that prove it, prove it, prove it again. But
Yes.
what if you just allowed yourself to do exactly what's required and not over deliver for a moment so that you have a chance to catch your breath? And
Mm,
I came away from that with this realization that setting a boundary for myself, whether, for example, it is that I'm not taking on a new project or I need to leave the office at a certain time, one day a week, or one day of the weekend is mine and mine alone and not, I won't take calls or deal with things unless it's an emergency. Setting a boundary is an act of self love. You're doing it because you care for yourself. But enforcing the boundary is an act of self respect because you make a decision every day and you let people know how serious that line that you've drawn is by how you allow people to approach it. And I think about that so often because we don't realize that every time we say, sure, schedule that call, you know what, of course I can do that for you. I'll get back to you. We can talk for 5 minutes, whatever the thing is. You're effectively saying that boundary I set isn't that important. You can break, and that is
right.
disrespecting yourself in the way that you said this matters, but not enough.
Oh, that is mic drop for me. I'm gonna just say that back for the person listening that's on a walk or that's driving or multitasking as they're listening to today's episode is having a boundary is an act of self-love. Enforcing that boundary is an act of self-respect. That is so profound. I cannot tell you the number of women that I coach. I have a beautiful soul that I was coaching and was so burnt out, working ridiculous hours, 80 hours, um, has two children years apart because of life's circumstances, right? So she has a younger little guy at home as well. All kinds of home stuff going on and working these ridiculous hours. And the more she worked, the more the company layered on and the more the company expected, right?
Yeah.
And it was this conversation about if you don't set boundaries, they will continue to pour
Yes.
on. I
Yes.
mean, that is the truth and the reality, and you it's a disservice to you, and it's a disservice to your family.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
here's the thing, that doesn't make a company bad, it just makes a company
No.
focus on its bottom line. But
Right.
you are the person who gives them the inch and or the mile. And the
That's
thing
right.
is, every time the company sees that you have capacity or you have the ability to take on more, they're going to want to ask for that and then some. And, in
That's right.
some ways, earlier in your career, you see that as the greatest sign that you are valued and that you're achieving and that you're getting kind of that recognition that you so desperately want. But what you realize is you're also setting a precedent for the fact that I will put myself second, third, and or last in service of insert whatever it is.
Absolutely. As a leader of large teams, what I would say, because you don't always have visibility to everything that's going on
Yeah.
in a direct reports world, right? As I would say, I'm going to keep asking and I'm going to keep assigning, right? Because you're amazing and all the things. I need you to tell me when you need to call a timeout and say, you know what? Or 90% of our deadlines are negotiable.
Yeah.
So it's okay for you to say to me, you know what, Cynthia, I can absolutely do that by the deadline you need it, but it means that I won't be able to do X, Y, and Z that you've also asked for. Help, among these things, which is the priority, you have to have agency in that conversation. Um, and so even if your boss hasn't given you that lifeline of that, you have to have agency in that conversation, which is I absolutely, yep, happy to do it. But let's talk about where that racks and stacks among everything else.
And therein, I would say, is actually something that I think we are learning in real time from Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because they're not waiting to be asked for permission. They are giving that opinion and they are setting those lines, drawing those lines.
Yes.
And it's really interesting the point about leading large teams. So I've been very, very fortunate in my career to have a chance to build and scale very large teams twice now for very hyper growth organizations. And there's a truth that obviously you want the very, very best people to come on board and you do want them to be able to scale as the organization is scaling. But you also want to make sure that you're actually invested in them as people, not just as their professional output. And
Mm,
how much is this person actually, what do they have on their plate? And that isn't to me just when you walk into the office, how are you doing, so and so? It's
right.
how are you? How things go. What did you get up to on the weekend? Was there downtime? Are you handling stress okay? And I say this because one of the things that I recognize now, and this was obviously a very extreme experience over COVID, but I say this even present tense, you know, 2026 in the world that we're in today, there's so much going in the world that is very, very unique and very
Mm,
stressful. It's divisive, but
hmm.
it causes us to react in ways that maybe we've never experienced before. We don't know how to navigate these things. If you're a leader, you're meant to have the answers. If you're a member of team, you're meant to show up and somehow perform and or deliver without this being a distraction for you. And I think that's also where this concept about leadership and how you show up for people, but also how you make space for them. Boy, does it make a difference. Yeah.
Because we're whole people. This notion of back in whatever decades that, people just compartmentalized, perhaps when there were more traditional division of, households. Perhaps it was easier then, but there aren't there isn't that division of households. The women statistically are still doing. I mean, there are exceptions, right? But statistically, in dual income families, the women are still doing the lion's share of the home care and the health care and all of the things and working. And it's hard to leave behind the stress of the aging parents that you're also caring for, or the sick toddler that you're leaving with the nanny, or the world events that are
Breaking your heart.
tearing you apart and breaking your heart. And maybe you have a very personal connection to whatever is happening in the world. I've always coached executives around you cannot expect that when we're having whatever the situation is, and depending on the airing of this particular episode, who knows what what the world will be experiencing. But the point is, there's always something, right? Um, is that you have to recognize that people may be really struggling beyond their day job.
And I think this is one of the things I would say, when I reflect on this now, before I became a parent, I know I managed and led people who became parents, on my watch. And I realized some of the questions that I was asking them that I thought were helpful were probably really triggering and stressful for them because I hadn't lived that experience. I didn't know how to create space for them to be dealing with the stress that they had, before 8 o'clock in the morning, but also, just a better understanding about what it's like to live when you are on depleted energy, when perhaps you don't have, there are seasons of not having the mental acuity that you are accustomed to, or even the stamina that you are, very much relying on. But I want to come back to something that we were just talking about in relation to, I guess, how we show up, and how we show up in a world that is moving, fast and hard and very different to perhaps what we were used to or that we had experienced in the past. One thing that I recognize, we're often taught about authenticity, about bringing our whole selves into the workplace. And I think that there is a truth, again, as a woman, but potentially also as a parent, we do create some kind of armor for ourselves in the workplace that is about, some version of a safe space or a boundary that we set so that we don't get too personal, we don't share too much, for fear of being perceived in a certain way. I think that there is somewhere in the middle where we actually need workplaces everywhere in the world need more empathy. They need more people coming in with both head and heart. And this isn't about whether it's a hard or a soft skill, it's about
That's
shared
right.
humanity. And
Mm.
so to me, I think the idea of kind of authenticity and vulnerability, they do have somewhat of an intermingling, but I think the truth is that irrespective of what your lived experience is, when you come into a room, you're choosing what parts of yourself you want to show and share. And that's actually okay. I don't think any of us are, I know only a handful of people I would say are always available, all of themselves, all the
Sure.
time, or audiences. But most of us, we're being more selective about that. And I think that isn't something that we have to be ashamed of, but that shouldn't limit our ability to have empathy for other people.
Yeah, shout out to a dear friend and a fellow author. Heather E. McGowan has a book
Mm,
out called The Empathy Advantage,
yes.
and it is about empathy and leadership. And she, as always, she's a workforce futurist, so she's always ahead of her time. Her book came out a couple of years ago, and I think it's just so pertinent right now. I wanna switch gears because
Yes.
you led down a path that I think is so important when we talk about showing up authentically, other things going on in our life. You mentioned at the opening that you have stage 4 is endometriosis, is
Yeah.
correct? And it reminded I wanna get into how that has shaped your life as a mother and as a professional and the work you're doing in the healthcare space
Yeah.
because the what example came to my mind, you mentioned on another podcast recently that you've had chronic pain for 30 years, and my heart breaks that you have to experience life that way. I think also about how much more prevalent conversations around menopause,
Yeah.
perimenopause, menopause, et cetera, are coming up, menstruation and issues and challenges with that. On a very minor note, but related to sort of the authenticity, I'm a 17-year breast cancer survivor.
Oh,
And I remember at a time I was going through chemo, was bald, I had my little hat on. Um, the CEO, a new CEO, had ousted the former and who had brought me in, and so we were a bit at odds, and he took me to lunch, to give me feedback, which was largely hearsay, so it was a little hard to hear, but I'm pretty I have pretty high response to negativity, so I was taking notes and thank you for sharing that and all the things, and there I sit, I'm in the middle of chemo, not that you can't have coaching conversations when somebody's going through that, but I'm setting the stage for the profound sort of moment, and so I handled it like a pro and took the notes and all the things, and he seemed pleased, and as we're walking we rode together, as we're walking back to the car, he says to me, I have a question for you. I'm fascinated. You lose your hair, but you still have your eyebrows. And I I I just remember being sort of dumbfounded by, "You just beat me up for an hour," right? Giving me all this feedback, 90% of which you can't substantiate.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sitting here, barely choking down a meal, and your empathetic comment as we're walking, and I just went, "Yep, it's a mystery." I mean, I didn't get into how I had
Good
pasted
for you.
eyelashes
Good
on
for
and
you.
drawn my
Yeah.
eyebrows on and, all the thing. I just said, "Yeah, it's a mystery." And I just remember shaking my head thinking, "For the love." So, with that as
Mm.
a sort of humorous introduction, chronic pain, living
Yeah.
with, something that took really forever to diagnose.
Yeah.
Talk to me, I mean, just wherever you wanna go with that, but I think I know that there's a woman listening who has a shared experience and who would value, if nothing else, the validation of another woman who had these struggles.
Yeah. Living with chronic pain definitely changes you, and I think it also changes, your mindset because you do have to compartmentalize something that is a daily, traveler with you. Um, and I think something like endometriosis, is particularly, insidious because
Mm,
it has a way of invading parts of your body where it's not meant to be, and things that in theory should be good and positive and have helpful implications in your body as a woman are actually triggering flare inducing and pain activating. So the more you learn about it, the more I think you can make different choices. But part of the challenge, which I know is the segue here, is that we know so little about the woman's body.
mm,
And so I will tell you a very short story about my
please.
experience. My diagnosis took almost 30 years, and I have lived with pain from a very young age, with the assumption because of the way I was met by medical professionals that this was normal, that it was either psychosomatic, meaning it was all in my head, or that everyone's time of the month feels like this. Everyone just deals with it better than you do. You need to
Mm,
toughen up, you need to be stronger mentally, physically. Um, you need to learn how to, kind of live with this because this is a woman's lot in life. And
mm,
these are actual things that were said to me by dozens and dozens of professionals over the years. And when you are met with that type of response, you really do walk away and start to believe that clearly it's me. It's my inability to handle and or cope with this, as opposed to something's really wrong with my body. Something feels wrong, feels off, feels like it needs to be taken seriously. And this is also part of why things like endometriosis, things like PCOS, fibroids as an example. On average, endometriosis takes between 7 and 10 years to get a diagnosis. And it's not because there are not medical professionals who understand it. Research shows us that it's because for the first 5 to 7 years, you're trying very hard not to be dismissed.
mm,
And so much of this is about when we talk about gender equity, when we talk about the gender health gap, and very related, the gender health data gap. It's about the fact that because these things have not been studied, because we don't have well characterized data, meaning research that definitively helps us understand why something has occurred and what we can do about it. Today, 2026, we still don't have an agreed understanding of how endometriosis occurs.
mm,
And so, if we don't understand the root cause, we can't get to a cure. And so the best thing that we have on offer right now is the ability to treat symptoms, which are short term in nature. And there are meaningful implications to the decisions that women and girls make for that type of treatment because it has
right.
longer term implications for both physical and mental health, as well as for, fertility, for reproductive options. So when I finally got my diagnosis, I was very fortunate to be in the hands of a professional who knew what they were looking at and knew what they were going to do. As I mentioned, 20 years of trying to have children and then a surgery that changed the trajectory of our lives. We at that point had very much given up. And then, we were in a situation that was, in my mind, very much a miracle of modern science, but,
Yeah.
the ability to have children naturally and to do so in quick succession. Um, I say this because not everyone's story has a happy ending. All of my pregnancies were high risk. I had my first child at 14. Um, but it meant that I was in a different place, both mentally and physically, in thinking about what I wanted, in making choices about how I wanted to pursue this, but also understanding what it was going to take from me. And I think one of the things that I have to give a shout out to and say was, I'm very, very fortunate that my husband is a meaningful partner in this journey.
Mm,
We are not just traveling through life, as co-pilots. I mean, he is deeply engaged, invested, and involved in every element of raising our children. And for the purposes of removing any doubt here, my husband is the primary caregiver, so that I can pursue the career that I had carved out for myself. And again,
right.
I would never be in a position to do this if that was not the choice that he had made and the sacrifice that he had made. And,
Mm.
shout out to my husband, but he is and was a very successful professional musician. So making this decision was giving something up that he loves. Um, and it's very much been such a gift for our children to have their father involved in a way that is so unique, particularly in Asia, and the dynamic and in kind of reverse to traditional gender roles.
Mm. Yeah, that is huge. I feel like there's a movement to where that is becoming the man staying home and being an integral part of raising the children is becoming a little more mainstream.
Yeah,
My children's father, we tried that when the kids were kind of middle school age for a bit. And I remember him having a good deal of struggle with how other men would tease
yeah,
and joke and perceive him. It's still not as commonplace, right?
mm,
But I and the other thing is, you mentioned Gen Z earlier, millennials, et cetera. My son and his wife are expecting their first in a couple of months, and the
later.
way they thank you, I'm excited. It's my fourth grandchild, and the way they talk about the partnership. They'll both continue to work, but they both have the ability to work from home. But it is, I mean, they're literally negotiating or have determined, like, you take these hours of the night and I take these hours. And I mean, pre baby coming, they've got this all worked out. But I love to see, and my son has said, "Mom, men my generation are way more involved, hands on," and he likens it to seeing them looking to their parents and how that distribution of labor was
Yeah.
not always equal, which I find
Yeah.
fascinating.
And, I mean, so much of what we're talking about, could be described as a version of see it, be it, right? If you can see it, you
Yes.
but I also think what's interesting when we talk about newer generations in our society, they haven't seen it, and so they are becoming it to fill the gap. And I think that
Uh,
it's a brave choice, but it's also a choice that has the potential to really change the makeup of how we interact as a society, and that gives me a lot of hope. I think having children is an act of optimism because how can you bring a life into the world and not think about wanting the world to subsequently be better than what they grow up into perhaps what your experience was. And if I come back to what then drives me to do the work that I'm doing, I have a son and two daughters. I do not want their truth to be that they are waiting for decades for whatever the diagnosis might be because we haven't made progress.
that's right.
I want to be in a situation where, statistics like women spend 25% more of their lives in poorer health than men. That should not be something that we say is a given. It's something that we have to challenge. But that will only happen with action as it relates to both meaningful data on women and also meaningful research from that data that then gives us a better understanding of conditions and a better way to treat them.
Which is so fascinating to me, and there's a level of ignorance in terms of, and I mean that in the truest definition. When you were talking about women's equity earlier and it taking years and years for diagnoses and women are dismissed, some of my very dear friends who are Black women have, expressed the mortality rates when it comes to childbirth and being dismissed in terms
Yeah,
of their pain levels. I'm embarrassed to say, but again, ignorance, right? Until you know and are exposed. I had no idea. I was mortified by the data when I started to really begin to see that coming into my view just within the last couple of years. And it's, if we don't talk about it, if we don't advocate for it, then then how do we make change? You were just in Davos recently, right?
Right.
And talk a little bit about the essence of that work and your advocacy in this space. I think it's important not only for building literacy for the
Yeah.
woman listening, myself included, um, but we can't make change if we are living in privilege, living in a situation where we haven't experienced chronic pain or women's health issues that haven't given us that exposure, right? It's easy to sort of put our head down and just go on with our happy little lives. We need to get the message out.
Yeah, and I think so much of this is also about removing the shame that comes from admitting that we may be less than perfect. I know for
Mm,
myself, again, I don't know where this thought came from, but it was pervasive for many, many decades in my young adult life. The belief that if someone knew that I was in chronic pain, that they would leave mine as weak, and therefore not somebody who was ownership material, not someone to invest in, not someone to give a promotion to or a high profile project. And I say that out loud now, and I think to myself, who on earth would take that point of
right,
view? And
right.
yet, there's a pervasive belief, I think, whether we're talking about being a woman in the workplace, being somebody who would be described as other, you are in a situation where you're always thinking about how is this going to be perceived versus necessarily what reality is. Um, so to kind of take this back to my experience last week in Davos at the World Economic Forum, um, the first of its so there was a women's health report, women's health investment outlook report that was released
Mm,
last week as part of many different pieces of research that were part of the conversation. And the data is impossible to ignore. Women drive half of healthcare demand, half the world's population, but only 6% of private capital is allocated to women's health. 6%. And when you get into, a slightly different viewpoint, which you may be familiar with, if you're talking about women wanting to found organizations, startups, large scale businesses to try to find real world solutions, whether it's for health or it's around equity in society and or insert your particular problem that you're solving for, less than 2% of all private capital goes to female founders. And to your point, if you are a person of color, if you're a non-woman, it's an even starker lower number.
right.
It gets into the point decimals. So I look at all of this and I think to myself, well, that's not a values problem. It's a market blind spot. This isn't,
Mm,
it isn't niched. It's one of the largest opportunities in healthcare. It's a capital alignment issue. It's a scale issue. It's a seriousness issue where we're somehow talking across each other rather than talking to each other. And that
mm,
to me means that addressing women's health, closing the women's health gap and the women's health data, it's not just a moral obligation that we have to make sure that we better see a pathway to population. It's a smart economic strategy. And that should get
right.
every country, every business leader and head of state engaged in a conversation to say, this is half the workforce. It is half of our society. How do we make sure that they are living with a quality of lives that allows them to be positive contributors and not necessarily burden to the stage, if that's how you want to describe this, but also just being able to live a life it is what we believe as humans we deserve.
Mm. Absolutely. And I can't believe how our time has flown by. I was just peeking at the clock and I could visit with you forever. And I think it's a little later your time. Your babies are probably already down. I love to end, we've covered a lot of territory, but I love to sort of wrap each episode with o- advice or wisdom that you would have for the women listening. One thing that they should start doing, stop doing, and continue doing.
So let me start with stop. Stop asking for permission. Wherever you are in life, whatever you are doing, whatever it is that lights you up and gets you out of bed in the morning, own it and get on with it. Because no one is going to give you the permission to live the life that you want. You have to
Love it.
start owning your excellence in whatever way works for you. I think so much of the time people think about the word excellent or even expert like it is this very far away thing that they couldn't possibly obtain. If you have been working at something for 5 years, for 10 years, 20 years, if you are dedicating your energy and your passion and your intelligence to something, you are demonstrating excellence. Own that. Take up that
Yeah.
space. express your opinions, bring ideas to the table. But you have to own your excellence and not assume again that somebody is going to see that in you and somehow give you the mic. And the continuing, I guess I come back to something we were talking about earlier. I think it's so important that we continue to have empathy for people who
Mm,
don't, who don't sound like us, whose lived experience is different from us. Because getting to a place where the world is more equitable in whatever lens you are looking through, it only works if the middle of us are part of the solution.
right. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Amy Kunrojpanya, it has been such a privilege and such a joy to have you on. Your vulnerability and authenticity. I know we were talking at the call before the call, as two women in busy organizations, large scale organizations, where we sort of were conditioned to wear the armor, to show up with our head more than our heart, whether that was expected or we believed it was the best path or some combination of both. It can be challenging to open up in a way that really exposes some of those vulnerable details, those things that we look back and think, gosh, I in hindsight I would have done that differently, or I wish I would have known this. I would have shown up differently or given myself more permission, more grace.
Yes,
Um
that's a
yeah,
perfect.
and you
Yeah,
absolutely, and you've done that so beautifully today, and every woman, every person listening is, benefiting from you sharing your story and your authenticity and your vulnerability, so thank you so, so much.
my absolute pleasure and privilege.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cynthia.
If this episode touched your heart, touched your mind, gave you something to ponder and think about, and you know another woman, another person that could benefit from hearing this, from validating what you're going through, or if it's inspired you to advocate, to get out there and use your voice and your influence, then please do so. Share the episode, share your voice, and let's make things more equitable for each of us living in this world, regardless of the lens you come through. We all deserve an equitable, just place to exist. Until next time, you've got this. Congratulations on choosing to invest in yourself. I know your time is precious. Thank you for spending it here with me. I believe in helping you look up, step forward, and fully realizing your potential. If today's conversation resonated, I'd be so grateful if you'd rate and comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you know someone who would benefit, please share this episode with them. Let's stay connected. Visit me at dr-cynthia.com, and you can find me on all the socials at Dr. Cynthia Bentzen-Mercer. Until next time, remember, boldly start working on your future today.